So, good evening and welcome back to the second installment of our in-depth book study of Neighborhood Church. I am so glad that you're here. Let's get right into it. I'm going to share the screen and we will do a short review of what we talked about last week. So, last week, we talked about a form of community organizing, or just a form of organizing called asset-based community development, which involves partnering with others and cultivating connections with the community through, most importantly, active listening. And then from that listening, developing partnerships that are transformative in nature. And this is what the book calls communal conversion. We learned that our mindsets they must change and from that mindset of scarcity that we don't have the resources, we can't pull this off, to abundance. So we change from scarcity to abundance. You could call it defiant optimism, if you will. And we learned that conversion must come through that much needed conversation, the DNA of listening. We learn to create an altar of our ears through actively listening to the needs of others and forming those partnerships where that conversation continues, strengthening and deepening those relationships even more. And that's what we call the transforming partnerships. So today, as we cover chapter 4, we will discuss how our space is just as important to the conversation and how it can help to propel us to that abundant mindset when we brainstorm all the ways in which we can utilize it for our community. Remember, one of the most important aspects of asset-based community development is using the resources that you have in the here and now. And one of those resources is your space. Every space has a story. What is your story? So we are going to watch the introductory video to chapter 4 now. And I have it all set up, so hopefully you should hear. I'm going to double check and make sure that my share sound's on. Okay. She points to data.
Hi, I'm Krin Tatenhove, co-author of Neighborhood Church. Today I'm on the grounds of the Baptist Temple in San Antonio. This 80,000 square foot campus has a remarkable story, something you'll hear in a few moments from their pastor. But first, let's do an overview of this chapter 4 called Integrating Our Space. I'm sure you would agree that of all the assets that we have as congregations, our physical plants, our campuses are some of the most powerful. And yet how many churches go from Sunday to Sunday without maximizing the square footage to serve the neighborhoods around us? This is what this chapter is about. And it's even about churches that already have some existing partners under their roof. How are we integrating our purposes with them? Have we found common ways to listen and develop partnerships? Here's a quote from the book. Too often, we share our buildings without attention to long-term redevelopment goals. Examples of this are common. Preschools that employ massive amounts of square footage, but whose students and families have no real connection to the host church. Nonprofits that incubate on our premises without ever hatching hybrid projects in partnership with us. Boy Scout troops, 12-step meetings, yoga and Zumba classes, or other outside groups that have no cross-fertilization with our congregation or its mission. Let's put it bluntly. Integrated space means that we only share our facility with those who truly want to partner, contributing to the increased spiritual energy and redevelopment of our congregations. This is not selfish or self-serving. It is a simple recognition that if our sacred places are to remain as beacons of faith for generations to come, we must position them for the long term. In this chapter, you will hear some amazing stories of congregations that learn to integrate their space. Which brings us to the story of Baptist Temple in San Antonio. This unique congregation and its 80,000 square foot facility sit at the intersections of historic Anglo, Hispanic, and African American neighborhoods that have all seen economic decline. In his 2014 State of the Union address, President Obama designated this area as one of the first 5 promise zones, a national initiative to revitalize high-poverty communities. When Pastor Jorge Zayas Bazan first arrived here, he says you could hear a pin drop from one end of the campus to the other. Let him tell you what has happened since then.
We're a church as part of a family of churches and service organizations that are utilizing this 80,000 square foot structure to reach our community, both physically and spiritually. When I first got here, the building was underutilized. It had at one time been the second largest church in San Antonio, or maybe the second largest Baptist church in San Antonio. But even then it was being left empty Monday through Friday most of the time. And everyone around me had told me that one of the greatest assets of this church was the buildings that were well constructed and well maintained. Well, when I got here, you could hear a pin drop. It was so quiet Monday through Friday. And also we had a huge utility bill that really concerned me, and there seemed to be no way for me to save money. So I led the church to decide instead to open our doors and see if we can use this church Monday through Friday, morning to night. So we have the thrift store and our food pantry and our community garden, which are all joint ventures of all the ministries in the church, including the schools. They all contribute to maintain it. They use it for education, and I look at it not so much as a food garden, but as a prayer garden. And it started slowly, but we got the word out that we wanted other congregations to meet here. We had the sanctuary and the smaller chapel and all kinds of big classrooms. And I know as a church planter myself how difficult it is to find places to meet. So that was one way where we could help one another. And then we started the charter school. That came to us, I think, as by an act of God, because I was just surprised at how much they knew and how ready they were to go. Honestly, if we had tried to do this ourselves, we'd still be trying to figure out the paperwork. Instead, we've had the school here for almost 10 years now. And we had an existing daycare, which we decided to make more valuable to the community by accepting vouchers. The city will pay daycares. They'll give parents a voucher so that they can pursue education and work and help their way out of poverty. And I thought that would be the best way that we could bring a missional stand to our daycare. And so we continue to look and search for different ways where we can partner with the community. Most recently, we have made a deal with the San Antonio Clubhouses, an organization that helps individuals that are living with mental illness find more productive lives. And they're going to be partnering us with in the very near future. I look at this as an opportunity to expand our ministry, our calling, without having to come up with dollars for it. They have the dollars, they have the expertise. They're going to do everything here, and we'll find ways of supporting them.
We leave you with one of the suggestions found at the end of Chapter 4 in Neighborhood Church. Think of a space in your facility that is sorely underutilized. Brainstorm with your group about possible ways it could be integrated for Christ's mission. And we pray this prayer with you, found at the end of the chapter. Loving God, your love extends to all times and places. We thank you for the gift of our church's facilities. Help us as good stewards to invest what you have given us in ways that advance Christ's purposes in our community. Amen.
Okay. So that one's so this is all about integrating our space. I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint here. Now here's where things start getting really good. And the next time you're in your church, I encourage you to try this idea out. Just take some time, some quiet time, to slowly walk through your facility and ask a few questions or jot some thoughts down on a piece of paper. You can do this as a prayer exercise with several members of your congregation, but it's basically an appraisal of how you view your space. And it's the first step toward an integrated space with partners and lasting relationships. But you could ask questions like what the author was talking about in the video. What could this space be used for? What's a space that is sorely underutilized? What can you envision for that space? There's going to be some more questions that are more specific later on that's part of an exercise. So just keep that in mind. On page 73, oh, my PowerPoint's messing up. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to fix that.
73.
Yeah.
83.
There. No. Okay. I don't know what. All right. Hold on 1 second. I think my computer froze. All right. Here we go. Integrating our space. So on page 73, the book says that we want to integrate our space rather than to repurpose it, which is pretty interesting. And what that means is that we should strive to have a shared vision and participation with those we partner with, believing that God brought us together for a unique purpose. So how can we integrate our buildings to serve God now and as a way of positioning our church for generations to come? I'm going to read you a quote from page 74. It says, integrated space means that we only share our facility with those who truly want to partner, contributing to the increased spiritual energy and redevelopment of our congregations. This is not selfish or self-serving. We even heard that in the video. It is a simple recognition that if our sacred places are to remain as beacons of faith for generations to come, we must position them for the long term. So they talked about that in the video. Relationships never work when they're just one-sided. So our partners must have shared visions. We can't be moving in opposite directions. And this is why it must always start with listening, communication, and more listening. And remember to pray, thy kingdom come. Take risks and take time to realign as well. So if I could just get this PowerPoint to work here. There we go. So Romans 8, chapter 11 says, if the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will give life through his spirit that dwells in you. As we begin to listen to those around us and see the gifts present in our congregations and communities, as partnerships grow, something special happens. We see this verse unfolding. And I quote page 78, this is the power of the resurrected Christ in our midst, the promise of abundant life. And it applies to a new sense of stewardship about our buildings. Rather than focusing on the burden of their upkeep, we focus on our renewed belief that God has fresh purposes we are only beginning to glimpse, end quote. That is an abundant mindset. That quote from that book really enveloped the abundant mindset. And that is also a great example of communal conversion. So we've talked in Presbytery meetings before about what Episcopal lay reader Andrew Weeks calls the vampire trap, where churches sometimes get too focused on filling the pews, saying, we need new visitors, we need new visitors. And Andrew Weeks' reply to that was that mentally is concerned primarily with what the church needs and not the world around it. It's a mindset of scarcity and fear and not abundance. So while we can't deny that church attendance has declined over the years, perhaps it's time to look at the issue by taking off our lens of familiarity and putting on a new lens, that of visitors, and examining our churches as if we're seeing them for the first time. We've been looking on the inside out for too long. Let's look on the outside in. So I'm going to go back to a slide from earlier. Figure out how to do that. So these questions from this slide, what stories are your facilities campus telling? Are we intentional about telling our story through our facilities? Is the story congruent with who we are? These are great questions to ask yourself, to ask your congregations. Andrew Weeks did an exercise like this with his congregation and had them examine things such as outdoor and indoor signage, room conditions, space usage, etc. The results led to a fresh awareness, a new perspective, and a resurrected sense of stewardship. It's amazing what can happen when we just take the time to slow down and build these kinds of practices into our church culture and build them in on a regular basis. Take time to check in, just like we need time to mentally check in with ourselves. Our church needs that time too. We need to give our church that time to check in with our facility and to ask these questions over and over again when the time is right. Allow ourselves to dream of what each space could be and to just let God speak to us in those quiet moments. So some of you may already be sharing your space with other groups. Page 80 has two very important questions to consider. The first is, are there meaningful connection points with your group, or do you have some sort of relationship with this organization? And if not, how can you take steps toward a common sense of mission? Perhaps you could meet with the leaders of the organization on a regular basis to check in and see how things are going, ask about their needs, ask how you can get involved, always listening and praying, thy kingdom come. And I think from the first study, the how can we get involved with you that's a golden ticket question. How can we get involved with your group? How can we support your group? So I would encourage you to do that if you have organizations that are sharing your space. And for those of you considering new partnerships, be sure to set clear expectations from the very beginning. Be clear of your intentions to integrate rather than to just share space. And let your groups know that you want to be part of their lives, not just a building that they use. And of course, remember to communicate your efforts and share your identities because every place has a story. So tell your story. So now I would like to read you a story. This is a case study, and if you have the book, it can be found on page 81. But I'd like to read this to you. This is called Art in Sacred Places. Partners for Sacred Places is a dynamic, creative nonprofit founded in 1989. They describe themselves as the only national, non-sectarian, nonprofit organization focused on building the capacity of congregations of historic sacred places to better serve their communities as anchor institutions, nurturing transformation and shaping vibrant, creative communities. One of their innovative projects is Art in Sacred Places. Its original premise was prompted by a simple observation. In many cities, especially those with skyrocketing rent prices, artists, theater troupes, and dance and performing groups are priced out of the market. They have no place to call their own for rehearsals and performances. PSP, or Partners for Sacred Places, asked a question that drove their research in 3 cities, Baltimore, Austin, and Detroit. How could the underutilized space in many sacred places be linked to these artists for a fruitful collaboration benefiting the community at large? Karen DeLossie, director of AISP, articulates the vision of the project, especially its intent to integrate, not just repurpose. She says, artists and sacred places often have a lot more in common than they realize. My passion stems from bridging the gap and helping them align their mission and visions, drawing lines to show how they can be mutually beneficial. Seeing them make these links is satisfying and rewarding, particularly when it leads to a stronger, healthier, and more open community. It shouldn't just be a marriage of convenience because of location or amenities, but one of common purpose in which one another's mission is expressed via the partner. Austin fit the research criteria perfectly. One of America's fastest growing cities, it is a mecca for the arts, known as the live music capital of the world, but also filled with burgeoning dance, theater, and filmmaking scenes. Its world-renowned South by Southwest Festival, primarily focused on music, has expanded to include these other flourishing areas of the arts. However, given the city's explosive growth, lease prices are exorbitant, beyond reach for artistic groups in their early stages of development. How could underutilized space in congregations and temples fill the gap? Lynn Osgood is the executive director of Geo Collaborative, a nonprofit partner of PSP in Austin. She coordinates AISP matches between artists and sacred places. As the process has unfolded, she uncovered a cultural phenomenon that may be widespread for American congregations trying to link themselves with their neighborhoods. She says, "We have found that many churches are open to space sharing with artists. They may need to develop new muscles for turning outward, but there is genuine excitement about the possibilities. It is the arts community that is reticent. The Austin arts scene is social justice oriented, and many within the community feel a distrust toward religious institutions. We are trying to overcome this hesitancy by highlighting the wonderful change for synergy." Osgood's findings are revealing. Clearly, churches that have been working tirelessly for peace and justice need to communicate their efforts. We need to share our identities more clearly. This telling of our stories is central to our community connections. If we are going to attract additional partners, we can't be hidden in plain sight. Whole generations may not fully understand how progressive churches have evolved to incarnate God's purposes in our world. We can tell our stories through our new partnerships, through social media, and through our engagement in public events. But unless people hear about the nature of our ministries as well as our compelling vision for the future, how can we expect them to be drawn to our campuses? So I thought that was just a really interesting and creative way that they partnered with the people around them where they saw a need and used their resources that they had available to create that partnership. So we have come to our first breakout session tonight. I want to skip this slide because we're going to come back to it. So our first breakout session of the night is thinking of a space in your facility that is underutilized and brainstorm with your group about possible ways it could be integrated for Christ's mission. So we are going to go to breakout rooms and we will think of a space that's underutilized, brainstorm ways that we can use that space, and we will take approximately 5 minutes and then we will return and discuss. All right. Okay. When you are prompted, please accept the invite.
Oh, nope.
All right. So I'm excited to hear about what you all discussed. And while we discuss that, I'm going to leave this slide that I skipped earlier up that just lists some ideas for use of space that I thought was neat. At my church, there is a space that I wouldn't say it's sorely underutilized, but Trinity in Valdosta is very blessed to have a movie theater room.
Oh, yeah.
And we were donated, I think the college donated us some stadium seating, and we have a big projector. And I just love that room. It's one of my favorite rooms in the church. And I've always thought it would be so nice if we had a community theater.
Friday night or Saturday matinee. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. And our community in Valdosta used to have a dollar theater it was just amazing, because if you were broke like me all the time and you really wanted to go to the movies as a college student, you could not afford $10 ticket to the movies, but you could go to the Ashley Cinemas and you could watch a movie for $1. And I thought, I'm sure so many people in our community miss that. And it would be so nice if we could just utilize our space here to maybe show movies like that, to give our community a way to go and see something where they're not spending an arm and a leg.
Mm-hmm.
We've had this thing this spring called Movies That Matter, and it was always my picks. I was the one that decided whether the movie mattered or not. But it was on Friday night, and we always had food, and the intention was that it would be an easy entry place for people. You know, you could invite your friends to watch a movie easier than you could say, why don't you go to church with me on Sunday morning? But it also would be cost effective because it was free for people in the community on limited budgets. But we don't have the lovely stadium seating. We brought lawn chairs to the fellowship hall.
Ours is small, but Brittany's got 20 seats in there?
About 20, yes.
Yeah. So it wouldn't be a mass audience, but I love the idea of making it available for 50 cents, $1.
Mm-hmm. And it's got a good sound system.
Yeah.
And it's nice.
I mean, it's quaint is a very good word. It's not huge. The screen you're not going to break your neck looking up at it, but it's a nice environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Would anybody else like to share?
Well, I was going to think you could also use it for something that the CE committee was talking about, the series The Chosen. You could have a watch party going on that, and then discussion groups afterwards, because the segments are 35, 45 minutes, which gives you a nice little block of time that you could discuss, the episode you just watched.
Absolutely. We actually just finished season 1.
So
yeah.
Well, all four of the ladies in our group said that we agree that we have a lot of space that's collecting dust.
Yes.
So that could be used in a lot of these other ways,
I think we all do. And we tend to just get used to things the way they are, which is why it's important for us to do those check-ins. I thought that was a really great trick that the book teaches is just to take the time. It's simple. It's nothing that you have to do that's really complicated. Just grab a couple of members and walk around and just think and envision what these places could be. Something the book doesn't mention that some of our church members have mentioned for ideas for using space is having your own members come in and teach skills. One of our members here has been teaching an iPhone class, and she uses our space to teach about the iPhone. And it's a skill that some of our older members really appreciate having the opportunity to come and learn about. And we're thinking about expanding and doing, maybe adding something for Samsung on there, and maybe adding some other skills such as how to use Word, how to surf on the internet, things like that. Just simple beginner skills for technology that we can all benefit from. But having someone teach skills is a good way to use your space. And a lot of times you never know what your members have hiding up their sleeve and what hidden talents that they have that they might could offer and teach. Well, good. So chapter 5, it starts with a very powerful quote from Augustine of Hippo, which you can read here. And page 93 says, initiating change is arduous. We who catalyze it will often be at the center of anxiety that stirs our congregations, end quote. Now, I didn't really like that when I read that. It's not very comforting thought for a lot of people, I can imagine. How can we as leaders put ease to these anxieties, even if we may even experience those anxieties, because change is tough, and it brings how can we bring clarity, and how can we be a part of bringing that clarity and calmness in order to sustain the vision? The book discusses 2 aspects of keeping things calm and anxiety free, and those 2 aspects are spirit-filled worship and mentoring new leaders. We'll talk about spirit-filled worship first, but I'm going to let the author go into that a little bit while we watch the chapter 5 video. Get to it here. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Rob Mueller, one of the co-authors of Neighborhood Church, and welcome to Chapter 5, Sustaining the Vision. You know, many church leaders pay a very high price trying to navigate the waters of cultural change and help their churches into new paradigms and new ways of being. And once you get into those new paradigms, it's hard to sustain the energy to be able to keep them going. We've discovered that one of the most important things in sustaining that vision is the importance of passionate worship and the ability to keep people connected to a living experience of the living presence of God. We're here at Shepherd of the Hills Presbyterian Church today, and they are known in our presbytery for being one of the churches that has very, very high energy and spirit-filled worship. And I'd like for you to hear what their pastor, Leon Bloater, and their worship arts director, Beth Watson, have to say about what they do here at Shepherd of the Hills to sustain the vision through passionate worship.
So Shepherd is an interesting church. It's not a terribly old church. It was actually founded in the 1980s. And our DNA here is very casual. It's informal, and it's a very kind of Austin-y crowd.
When we say Austin-y, I mean that we need to unpack that a bit. Because this is a particularly interesting place. It's a melting pot of a lot of different people from different backgrounds, and also our church is, I would consider it kind of a purple church in a lot of ways. We have people from all, sort of theological, political, those kinds of backgrounds and points of view, but it works. And I think the approach that we have, where we are uniquely sort of us in whatever we do, whether it's in our casual worship service or in our traditional worship service, it's definitely, it fits our particular context.
And we're a church that doesn't pay attention to trends. So we don't try to do a thing that isn't us because we think it will make us grow or that it will attract people. We try to live fully into our sort of our authentic incarnation of being the church in this time and place.
The key is authentic. So when you're cueing in on authentic, then some of the things that you are wanting to happen, that your church would be vibrant and thrive, and that people would be drawn to be a part of the family of faith, those things happen out of authenticity.
Yeah, out of relationship.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, we definitely use a variety of media and all kinds of different means to communicate that and to live sort of authentically into what we see as our calling to be the church. I mean, we say that we love God and love everybody, and that's something that we communicate in a variety of ways as well. That you immediately go to our website and the first thing that you see is love God, love everybody. We want that to be a message that is conveyed, that this is a place where all are welcome. And we really want to live into that.
Leanna and I think and talk with one another about the theology of all of these pieces. We don't just do it because it's fun or cool. And so one of the reasons why we incorporate non-explicitly Christian music in our worship is that all of life is sacred. All of God, all of life is for God to be in the midst of. And we don't have our Sunday morning persona and then the rest of our lives. Right. And so we want life of faith to permeate everything about everybody in our congregation.
Absolutely.
We want it to permeate their jobs and their family lives and the way they drive and the way they shop. And so we want to model that here in our communal worship together so that people have the opportunity to invite God into all that they are, the messy and the clean and the good and the bad and the everything in between. And also to recognize that God is present even when we aren't saying Jesus Christ. God is in the midst of all of creation. God is in the midst of all of beauty, all of love. All those things are of God. And so we don't want people to feel like that the Christian life should be lived in a bubble. Right. We want people to embrace God's presence in every part of who they are.
So I think that some people fear change because they worry that somehow the message is going to be lost if it's conveyed in a different way. And that's something that we strive very hard to make sure that...
that's the piece that doesn't change.
It doesn't change. I remember having a conversation with a dear lady who was asking me, why do we change this? Or why do we have to do this? And my response was, well, we need to change some things or, we're going to die. We have to still remain authentic within our context, and the context around us has changed.
Sustaining the vision for a congregation that seeks to adapt itself to the context that is constantly changing around us is not easy. It requires passionate and engaging worship that keeps us connected to the living presence of God, that motivates us and keeps us supported as we navigate what are very difficult waters sometimes. It also requires leadership that is willing to be flexible and adaptable to the things that change around them, both within the church and outside of the church. If we're going to be faithful to the message of Jesus Christ, we have to learn how to be flexible in the ways in which we proclaim that message. I hope this chapter will help you in being able to identify some of those ways that can benefit your congregation and its life as you seek to be a good neighbor in the midst of your community.
Okay. So, um, and those changes could look different for every church. Some change might be bigger changes, other changes might be smaller changes, but not all changes are going to be huge and drastic. Some of them are going to be tiny, but they can make a big difference. But we need vibrant, life-giving worship like we need air and water. That's what distinguishes us from nonprofit charities, no matter how many of them we count among our partners. Worship fuels our mission. A lot of visitors leave churches never to return because they report that the worship is unengaging. That brings us to a place where we have to start asking ourselves some hard questions. Are we brave enough to remove our lens of familiarity and look inward to our worship and see it through the eyes of visitors? Is our worship dry? Is it routine? Is it predictable? Is it lacking in spirit? Those are hard but necessary questions to ask. But instead of focusing on forms such as traditional versus contemporary worship, liturgical versus evangelical, and high church versus low church, we could focus on the function to lead people into the presence of the living God. So we could focus on function. So I'm quoting from page 96 here. It is not the style that matters, but the spirited energy with which it is imbued. No matter what worship style we adopt, underlying principles help bring us into the presence of the living God. Best practices that fuel worship, that is more incarnational. We call them remembering our purpose, understanding our context, and becoming multilingual. End quote. Page 99 reads that we are called to incarnate precisely where we find ourselves. For some, this means the multicultural streets of an inner city. For others, the manicured lawns and orderly avenues of a settled suburb. For others, a country landscape where neighbors live miles apart. Small towns, mid-sized cities, metropolitan centers each have unique characteristics. Communities have their own distinct patterns, voices, and language for loving God authentically. So think of the unique and authentic life experience that you have to offer the world. No one can offer the world the same exact experience as you. Congregations and communities are the same way. Faith is part of culture. So I'm going to read you an excerpt from the book starting on page 100. You get there. So Reverend Barbara Holmes, in her book, Joy Unspeakable, Contemplative Practices of the Black Church, speaks of enculturation within her context. She says, all things draw from the same wellspring of spiritual energy. This means that the sermonic and religious can be mediated through a saxophone just as effectively as through a pastor. The need to create impermeable boundaries between the sacred and the secular is a much more recent appropriation of Western values. Historically, most efforts to wall off the doctrinal rightness and wrongness of particular practices failed. Instead, hearers of the gospel enculturated and improvised on the main themes so as to tune the message for their own hearing. Given Christianity's preferential option for the poor, the cross-pollination of jazz, blues, and tap with church music and practices could be considered the epitome of missional outreach and spiritual creativity. Father Jose Marines was a theological advisor for the Latin American bishops at the Second Vatican Council. He says that authentic presentation of the good news of Jesus always involves 5 things. 1, the message, or Jesus Christ. 2, messengers, those who bring the message. 3, means, the methodologies they employ. 4, media, the media utilized within these methodologies. And 5, milieu, the social, political, and religious context within which the message is communicated. Only one of these doesn't change, the message, because the message is a person, Jesus Christ. To communicate Jesus's teachings to a unique people in a unique time of history, all the others must change. So, we get bogged down a lot with worship wars. We hear comments like, well, we just don't do things that way, or this has been a tradition for years, why change it? But what if we're arguing about the wrong questions? What if instead we ask the questions here, these questions? I'm quoting page 103 here, where it says, the problem for so many churches is that we hold on so tightly to our practices that we cannot consider what is actually essential about our worship. How is our worship relevant in a post-Christian environment, both inside and outside our doors? Is our goal self-perpetuation, or is it to bring glory to God in this time and in this place? End quote. So these questions here are so important. Again, these are reflective questions that help us to really just check in with the state of our congregation, of our church. And I would encourage you to just jot them down. And if you'd like the PowerPoint, I can send it to you. But I would encourage you to jot these and take some time, sometime in the future, to just think on these. So I'll come back to that. But the second aspect, in addition to spirit-filled worship, is mentoring new leaders. New leaders are one of the most valuable assets of your church because their influence can be enormous in sustaining your vision for years to come. But you must make sure you have good mentorship programs in place. Classes that give a working knowledge of Christian and denominational history as well as local polity are important. It's also a good idea to share your church's unique traditions because every leader must first incarnate within a congregation's culture before implementing change. But just remember, we want leaders and not conformists. So we want our leaders to use their own gifts for the church. Mentoring is not easy, it's messy, it's time-consuming, and it takes a lot of sacrifice. I'm going to read you a case study from Rob Mueller, and you can find this on page 109 if you have the book. This is a shorter study. Rob says, mentoring is one of our weakest areas at Divine Redeemer. As a smaller congregation, we struggle to fill our leadership slots every year with willing candidates. It is not uncommon for new members to be quickly targeted as potential elders, lured into service by promises that it isn't much work. They soon discover that there is plenty to do and few who are willing to help them learn the ropes. Like babies who graduate from infant float class, they are dropped from the diving board into the deep end of church leadership. We rarely put in the amount of personal time and energy to help them feel like they're not drowning. I have experienced a lot of failure in this regard, and I consider it one of the most urgent growth areas for my own pastoral development and our congregation's health. Further, I know I am not alone in this realization. Early in my ministry, a mentor gave me a powerful image. Every church leader should have one hand held by someone who is disciplining them into maturity, and the other joined to a newer leader whom they are also mentoring. The image is compelling. Chain of disciples receiving wisdom and passing it along. A self-sustaining, vital linkage that ensures the development of future leaders. The hard truth is that few of us manage to prioritize this essential discipline. Instead, we are fragmented in our attempts to support, encourage, and build up emerging leaders for our church communities. Some of you may relate to Rob's situation. I know that there have been times where I certainly have related to that. Page 111 says, anyone who has been in a position of church leadership knows how challenging it can be. It tests our minds, hearts, and spirits. It can strain our very faith. It means understanding our own spiritual gifts and how we can work synergistically with others. It requires love, patience, and self-reflection, but it can also bring us moments of great joy as we discover the Spirit using us to advance the causes of Christ. So we've come to our last breakout session, and we will discuss the leadership development process in our own congregations. Let's take about 5 minutes to discuss this with our group, and at the end of the session, we will share. I'm going to broadcast this question and try to screen share this to your pages as well. All right. So when you're prompted, just accept the invite for breakout rooms, and then you should see the question pop up as a message. Welcome back. So, leadership. Anyone like to share what they discussed?
I am so grateful to Cheryl, who is an educator at heart and by passion and by skill, who is also a clerk of our session now. And together, we're taking an intentional, we're setting out an intentional mentoring kind of, educating kind of track with session elders. And I wouldn't have time to do that. But Cheryl does. It's a real gift to us.
He may learn how to do it real quick.
Well, I've done it in other places. I just don't have time to do it now.
I know.
That's a perfect example of using your resources.
Yes, and when I mapped my assets, Cheryl was one.
Yes, that's good. Absolutely. We all have our gifts that we can bring. I lament at my church that we do have a mentoring program amongst our session. It suffered a little bit when COVID hit, and now it's slowly starting to build back up after COVID. And it's funny how so many things changed during that time. And some things remain the same that I didn't expect would remain the same. And some things changed that I didn't expect would change. But I do hope that in the future, we will continue to be more intentional with that program and just keep building on it. And it's kind of like the chain. It's each session member has an older member and a younger member that they're assigned. And I think it's called the Shepherd's Program. Beth, do you remember what it's called? It's called the Shepherd.
I think so. I know there's definitely the older member me and the younger member Glennie. But yeah, it's a good program. We were talking in our breakout session about, the going to a church that doesn't have a mentoring versus going to one that does, and how it's like night and day. It's to be an elder and told one thing, and then get to another church and you're an elder and you're told something like 180 different. You're like, oh wow, oh okay, bonus.
Yeah. We'll always remember to keep that mindset of abundance, especially when it comes to mentoring new leaders, and believing that God will bring us and our congregations the exact individuals needed to carry on a vision for the future. Mentoring new leaders means entering into a relationship with them, sharing your successes and failures, and it's a shared vulnerability, really. It's not as much about wielding authority as that we are travelers on the road to Emmaus with each other. So now that we have covered most of the components to asset-based community development, I would like to take a look at a practical application now that we can use. So this is an asset mapping review, and it can be found in the back of the book as an appendix, but it is actually a sample workshop. So the review maps out these traits here. Thinking inside the box, taking a candid look at the traditional ways of thinking and how they affect us. So you could use this mapping review here as a function or an exercise with your next group. And you could go through these steps And this would sort of give you a community-based asset development guideline of how to sort of reflect on your church and reflect on your space. And it would just be a great way to brainstorm new ideas, ministries, or what resources you have that you can use in different ways. Because some of us, we use our resources in one specific way and we just get that tunnel vision and we don't realize, oh, I can use this for something else too. So this is a really great way to sort of help us to think outside of the box and reframe our narratives a little bit. So what is asset mapping? It helps us recognize the strengths and gifts that we have as a congregation and how to leverage them for growth and outreach. So we would then identify physical assets of the church and write down at least 3 assets of the church. These would include buildings, equipment, objects. So this would be a really great exercise. Write down at least 3 good assets that you have. And then identify individual assets or gifts that you personally can give to your community. Things that you know something about and would enjoy sharing with others, such as art, history, books. Things or skills you know how to do and could share with others, such as carpentry, sports, or cooking, like a cooking class. It was what we talked about earlier about utilizing our spaces to teach skills and things like that. Identifying associations is writing down at least 3 associations that you are part of or that exist in your community. So these could be voluntary groups, networks, organizations, things like that. Then you move on to identifying institutions in your community. So you would write down at least 3 institutions in your community. Excuse me. These are public agencies, schools, nonprofit places, private businesses, parks. It's great to get in good with the Parks and Rec department. And then you post it. Post your assets on a blank space, like a blank wall. Don't organize or categorize them. Just have your people post them on a blank space. And then put the pieces together. As you look at your wall of assets, both your own and others, begin to brainstorm how 2 or more could be connected to accomplish something. Name that action. Is it a project? Is it an event, a demonstration, or is it something else? And then finally, you would come to the sharing and voting phase, where each group will share the action plan they came up with. And after listening to each group's idea, go stand by the one you would be involved with and support. So this would be a great workshop for youth. It would be a great workshop, for youth to tailor their own ministry. It would be a great workshop to do as an entire church, or for families for a faith formation, just depending on what type of exercise you want to do. But this would be a great tool to use to just inspire folks and just get them to thinking about some different things. So we have covered all the components to asset-based community development. Let's take a look. Hold on one second. I lost my place here. Here I am. So remember the 5 best practices in this book for asset-based community development, and they're right here on the PowerPoint. 5 best practices: communal conversion, turning away from scarcity to abundance. That's the main thing of communal conversion. The DNA of listening, making an altar of our ears. Without listening, none of this can happen. Transforming partnerships. Every partnership should be a nexus of transformation in our lives. It doesn't have to be a huge transformation. So we have 2 groups here that we partner with at Trinity. One group we are involved with a little bit more than the other. One group is the Scouts that meet here at Trinity, and we keep in touch with the Scouts. They do a lot of their own trips and things like that. But when we have our events, they always come to our trunk or treat events, our fellowship events, things like that. We always see Scout families for that. We visit with the Scouts. We have members that come by and invite them and make sure they stay up to date on what all special things that we have going on. And we're always looking for new ways that we can support them. Another group that we're not as involved with, but we're looking forward to being more involved with, is a homeschooling group that's coming in the fall, and they have not quite moved in yet. But when we first started partnering with this group, we did make it very clear that we wanted to be a part of their lives, that we wanted them to know that they could use our facility, but that we also would hope that they would come to our Wednesday night suppers, and that we could be involved with their things that they do, such as coming and visiting the kids, having a story time with the kids, having members come and help with food and cooking, just finding reasons to get together and be in each other's presence and listen to one another is so important. So there's to those transforming partnerships, integrating our space. We can share our space, but it's far more powerful to integrate it. Remember, the book was talking about integrating it rather than repurposing. So not just changing it from one thing to the other, but actually integrating it for what you specifically need and for what your group specifically needs. Integrating that space and sustaining that vision through authentic worship and mentoring new leaders. And remember, the most frequent commandment in Scripture is do not be afraid. So many times we worry, and most of us are worriers, and we worry, is this going to work out? Do we have what we need for this? Do we have enough volunteers? And we worry about all these things, and Scripture constantly reminds us, do not be afraid. We face uncertainties in life, and I'm going to leave you with a quote from page 118. The Church of Jesus Christ has lived, worked, and died in eras equally as challenging as ours. All the doomsaying about perishing in a post-Christian culture only diverts us from our mission. So the culture changes, we can change too, and we can definitely sustain our vision for the future. Big changes, little changes, all of it is hard. But God tells us, do not be afraid, and we can do it. So folks, that wraps up our neighborhood church book study. It has been an absolute honor, and I thank you so much for joining me.